Hello everyone, Gammon here. This video is going to show and discuss explicit content, including sexual violence. This was your content warning. You've been warned. And now on with the video. So I'm somewhat of a fan of Super Eyepatch Wolf's work, and Gantz was a manga I absolutely loved as a teenager. So you'd think his latest video where he's talking about why people should read Gantz would be, well, right up my alley. However, after watching the video and rereading the manga multiple times, I can't help but find that the video is filled with misrepresentations, omissions, minor mistakes, and generally ends up picking and choosing from the source material to reach a conclusion I just can't really agree with. Or at the very least can't agree with the way he got there, which is why I decided to make this response video. Now before I start showing clips from his video and responding to them, I need to talk about one major omission from his entire video. Wolf never spoke about the single biggest core issue Gantz has and why you may want to give the manga a pass. The closest he ever came to it is two throwaway remarks. He mentioned in passing that the mangaka wasn't the best storyteller, something I don't fully agree with, and that 2chan didn't like the ending. But he never expanded on that or explained why that may make you not want to read Gantz. Unfortunately, in the same vein of Battlestar Galactica or Lost, Gantz introduces multiple mysteries that are never resolved or just not resolved in a satisfying manner. An example of this is that very early in the manga a gun is introduced called the X-Gun. This gun sends people away. The obvious and immediate question is, where does this gun send people away to? Where are these people going? This is one of many questions that will never get resolved. Another example of a dropped plot point, and this is a very minor spoiler, is that at some point in the story, along with aliens, vampires get introduced. We're also told that vampires are a product of nanomachines that were actually invented 300 years ago. Now, this may seem like a major thing, but both the concept of nanomachines being invented in the 17th century and the existence of vampires are all forgotten within a few issues, and all the characters that were involved in the vampire subplot just kinda go away. The information and the characters don't get utilized, expanded on, and all the questions that arise from this information and all the subplots that come from the arc never get resolved. They all get unceremoniously dropped. And these are just a few things I felt comfortable sharing because of how little relevance they have to the main story arc, or well, the story in general, to be honest. There are many more. The story is riddled with plot holes, inconsistencies, characters behaving in a completely irrational manner, multiple subplots and side characters are dropped, and the ending is oh boy. The ending is not the best. It essentially tries to answer every question, but it forgets some of the things it needs to answer, gives horrible answers to some of the questions, or just really dumb answers, and will be very unsatisfying if you're the type of person that needs a coherent plot to enjoy a story. However, despite everything I just said, the reason I will to a degree defend Oku's abilities as a storyteller is that the ending did make my cold dead heart burst with feelings. And even on the second reading, when I knew what was coming, I still felt afraid for the main characters, and when the story ended, my eyes did glisten with manly moisture. But objectively speaking, yeah, the story is extremely flawed, so is the ending. Big old trash fire. To sum up my drivel, while Gantz does provide emotional payoffs, its story lacks logical consistency. Thankfully, Gantz's story is very emotional and very character driven. It's very hard to read Gantz and not get emotionally invested in the characters, who are all very flawed but nearly all good people at their core. or at the very least not without some redeeming qualities. Following these characters and loving these characters can help most people, or at least I believe it can help most people, get over most if not all of the problems the main narrative has. But for some, these logical inconsistencies would be too much to bear. This information is something I felt was completely absent from Super Eyepatch's video, and something you should keep in mind if you want to pick up Gantz. Gantz is not for everyone, for a multitude of reasons. However, if you're able to get past an inconsistent story, boy is it good. Okay, so now that we have ended the intro, I'll start, rolling clips from Eyepatch's video and explaining the issues with each clip. I won't be playing the entire video as there are many parts of it I agree with and I don't want to waste your time. There is a link to Eyepatch's original video in the description below, so you can watch the full video just in case you haven't already. So on with the first clip.
Okay, picture this. You and a buddy are waiting for a train at your local train station when suddenly a homeless man falls down onto the tracks, just as 3,000 tons of locomotive begins to barrel towards him. And being the upstanding young gentleman you are, you climb down onto the tracks in an attempt to save him, which you do, but both you and your well-intentioned friend are struck by the same train and killed. You are now dead.
Okay, so, off to a horrible start. This description of Gantz's first chapter is a horrible misrepresentation of all of the events. In this point of the story, Kay is not well intentioned or the type of person who'd put himself at risk to save someone else. And Kay and Kato aren't even friends. This is what actually happened in Gantz's first chapter. Kay, our protagonist, is approached by an old woman asking for directions. He decides it would be too much of a hassle to help her and just flat out lies. When the woman realizes she was given bad directions and confronts Kay about it, instead of apologizing, he scolds her for depending on others too much. And for anyone thinking, holy shit, Kay is a giant asshole. Your powers of observation are astounding. Yes, you're correct, but don't worry because the next thing that happens is Kay agreeing with you. Kay mocks other people, acting superior to them, but acknowledges that actually he's just as bad if not worse than all of them. And to put a cherry on the shit sandwich that is Kay's personality at the very start of the story, when the homeless man falls down, instead of feeling concern or fear or worry, or anything a functional human being would feel, he gets excited about the idea of seeing a dead body in real life. The only reason he went down to the tracks to help the homeless man is because he was spotted by Kato and directly asked for help. Kato is someone he hasn't seen since elementary school at this point of the story. A person who was his best friend at the time, but when Kay spots him, his first thoughts are that Kato is probably an asshole now and that he won't recognize him. Kay and Kato are not friends. They used to be friends, but now they're mostly strangers. Kay doesn't even expect Kato to recognize him. And if Kato wasn't there, if Kato didn't recognize him, and if Kay wasn't so desperate for any kind of human friendship, he probably would have stood by and watched the man die. At this point in the story, Kay is the type of person whose dying thoughts, as he's seeing the person that was his childhood friend die, are serves you right, dumbass. Now, the reason I'm upset about the way this scene was represented is because of how much information these opening pages give you and how contrary to that information his description of events is. He mischaracterized not only the nature of the event but also Kay's personality and the relationship between him and Kato. These pages are so packed with information, most of what Eyepatch Wolf talked about in his video can be demonstrated in the very first chapter. The world's indifference to the weak can be showing Kay's reaction to the old lady, but also in the way the people on the platform refuse to help both the homeless man as well as Kay and Kato. Kay's shitty personality and incredibly nihilistic nature can be shown by, well, almost everything he's done this chapter. And for anyone who didn't notice, yes, he is a major asshole. But you also learn about his intense self-hatred. Another point that's kinda crucial to Gantz and that Eyepatch Wolf didn't mention in his video. His loneliness and his desire for human connection. And on a side note, I love how Kato is shown in this scene. He's not your traditional hero, he doesn't jump to the rescue. He's terrified. He's visibly shaking and sweating, and he has to psych himself up before jumping down to the platform, showing he's only doing this because, well, nobody else is. He's a hero by necessity because he's just unable to stand by and watch another man die. But he's not this classic hero figure that jumps into danger without any thought of his own well-being. He forces himself to become a hero because nobody else is willing to do it. The amount of information you can get from the first episode about the characters and the world is insane. Most of Gantz is actually encapsulated in the first chapter. And while I can understand why Eyepatch Wolf couldn't talk about everything that happened in the first chapter because, well, look at how long it took me to do it, I think he really should have tried to at the very least be accurate about the things he did say, because the things he did say paint a picture that is just completely inaccurate. Okay, I'm gonna try to keep the rest of this shorter, no promises. Let's move on to the next clip.
There's a cynicism that runs through every part of Gantz, never more apparent than in its main character, Kei Kurono. And Kurono kind of sucks. He's cynical, isolated, and bitter, having separated from his family with no friends or anyone he can even really talk to. And because of this, he's grown apathetic and cold, only seeing other people for how they can benefit him, even abusing the trust other people place in him for his own ends. And because of this, it's very easy to dislike Kurono, especially in Gantz's early chapters. But after a little while, what becomes apparent is that he's a product of the world around him. Kurono's school, for example, is presented as this Darwinian nightmare where older students sow violence and humiliation among their younger peers. One particular early story arc involving an upperclassman known as the Dentist, who tortures his classmates by ripping out their teeth and collecting them. This is the world of Gantz. It presents society at its most bleak and callous, and because of this, it's easy to see how Kurono has become the way he is. How the life and enthusiasm he had as a child has been crushed out of him, leaving a cold, cynical shell of a person. And in understanding this, it gives us a believable baseline from which we can watch Kurono grow over the course of the story. And that's a growth that starts when he's drawn into the game of Gantz.
Eyepatch Wolf isn't wrong, but he left out a lot of context that's needed to get a real understanding of Kei's personality as well as the world of Gantz. First, yes, Kei isn't someone you can like when the manga starts. Something I hope I made explicitly clear when I described the very first episode in detail. Kei is a tremendous asshole. However, you're not supposed to like Kei, and you can actually relate with him because he also hates himself. Kei isn't a completely bad person. Deep down, he's actually a good person. He's borderline heroic, but he's acting like and trying to become an asshole, and that's because, well, he saw what happens in this world to people who try to do the right thing. Yes, Gantz's world is brutal and horrible. However, Eyepatch didn't explain the link between that and Kei deciding to remove himself from society, or even that Kei removed himself. This link is shown through the scenes Eyepatch Wolf mentioned, but also through most of the work. Gantz's world is filled with people trying to do the right thing, getting the absolute shit kicked out of them because they tried. So, for instance, during the dentist scene, the person you see getting kicked came over to try and help his friend. His reward was losing a tooth and getting extorted. And the only reason Kay even got in contact with the dentist is because someone from his class, someone who considered Kay to be his friend, asked him to help him because he was getting extorted. Most of the time, people get into serious trouble in this manga, it's because they're trying to help someone else. This rule, and this very much is a rule in Gantz, that any time you try to help someone, you will get punished, also explains why Kato and Kay are so different. Kato is significantly bigger and stronger than Kay. In his school, when a child gets bullied and a teacher ignores the problem, Kato steps up and scares the bullies away. This gets him into huge amounts of trouble that he only manages to get out of because he's strong enough to kick the ass of the person coming from his. If Kay had done the exact same thing, he would have been left completely brutalized. Kay can't be Kato. He can't be a hero. He's not strong enough. Or at least that's how he feels at this point of the story. But he also can't turn his back on a friend. This is shown in the very first episode, but it will also be shown later in the manga. Once Kay actually decides that he cares about someone, he can't help himself. He's forced by his own heroic nature to try and help them. Because of this, he shuts himself from others as a fucked up form of self-defense. In Gantz's world, trying to help the weak, trying to help anyone usually brings you nothing but pain and suffering. There are multiple examples of people ending up dead because they tried to help a loved one, getting into trouble because they tried to do the right thing, and multiple examples of people coming into contact with bad influences and turning into monsters because of it. That's a missing piece of information from Eyepatch's video about why Kay cuts himself off from other people. He isolates himself from the world by choice, and this is important to remember, so I'll repeat it. His isolation is a choice he makes himself. And he made that choice because the world taught him opening himself up to or helping other people brings nothing but pain. And this isn't something that changes when he's forced into Gantz. The Gantz teams are no different from the outside world. Let's move on to the next clip to show you why Kay choosing his own isolation is so important.
While being summoned by Gantz is initially a very bad thing that forces Kurono to face unimaginable horror, it also does something else. It shatters Kurono's isolation, forcing him into contact with the other participants of the game, their only hope for survival being to work together to overcome whatever danger the night brings. And so, slowly, over the course of the games, people start to rely on Kurono, and he in turn begins to rely on them, the group sharing a bond that is absent from Kurono's ordinary life.
The reasons these bonds are absent from Kay's ordinary life isn't because he doesn't have the opportunity to make them, it's because he actively chooses not to have them. He's already forced into contact with other people on a daily basis. He goes to school, and he has people there he interacts with. Some of them even think they're his friends. But he chooses not to befriend them, not to call them his friends, and joining Gantz in no way breaks his isolation. In some ways, it actually amplifies it. Despite the description Eyepatch Wolf gives, cooperation is not the only viable strategy to survive Gantz, and the first person we see to have had some success in the game actually uses a strategy that isolates himself from the other members and depends on them dying. Kay doesn't bond with almost any of the other members in the first few Gantz teams. He's also not their leader, nor are they relying on him. Kato is the person everyone looks up to, not Kay. This of course makes Kay insanely jealous. Kay pushes everyone away. He chooses to live alone. He chooses not to call anyone in his classroom a friend. He chooses to push Kishimoto away and treat her horribly. He chooses to reject the woman who loves him. Kay actively cuts himself off from the world, and this never changed in the early Gantz missions. If anything, his general distrust of other humans is reinforced as he gets betrayed by the bad human elements in his team. What being forced into Gantz does do is rebuild his shattered self-esteem. It makes him remember he has value, that he can survive adversity. In the early missions, he doesn't want to go back to Gantz because of the people there. He wants to go back because it's the one place in his life where he feels like he's excelling, where he's useful, where he's doing something great, where he can shine. And while he does change eventually, that change doesn't come from cooperating with people within the Gantz teams. I'm going to roll one more clip and then we'll continue on this line of thought.
In his daily life, Chrono is this nobody who is harassed and ignored. But through Gantz, he's found this group of people he's really important to and are important to him, letting him grow past the selfish asshole we met at the beginning of the story.
So this version of K does exist, but it exists much later in the manga. In the early arcs, he doesn't open himself up to other Gantz members, he doesn't lead, and there is no sense of found family in the arcs preceding his transformation. And this is really important, so I'll repeat. Everything that Eyepatch Wolf talked about happened because and after K changed. None of them existed before his change, so they did not and could not have caused his transformation. Now, in order for me to qualify my statements, I'm gonna have to use spoilers, so I'll be describing in broad strokes what happened in the first 3 missions of the manga, just to show how they, well, don't at all resemble what Eyepatch Wolf described. If you want to skip the major spoilers, here's a timecode to skip to the part where I stop talking about the missions and describe the moment K actually does change. There are 4 missions that happen with K before he begins to change, and the 4th one is a solo mission, so obviously he's not going to learn to rely on other people or cooperate with anyone. So I'm going to skip the 4th mission and just talk about the first 3. In the first mission, he tries to act cool, only to abandon the one person he said he'd protect. This causes that person to despise him. He then beats the alien on his own without cooperating with any of the other members, neither Kato nor the grade schooler. It's not exactly what I'd call a bonding experience or something that makes others look up to him. In fact, Kishimoto clearly resents him abandoning her. On the second mission, he's separated from the main force for almost all of the mission and is taken hostage and used as a human shield by a biker gang. Again, not what I'd call a bonding experience or something that improves his opinion of other people. While he does do some very cool stuff, he's not really acknowledged by anyone outside of Kato. For everyone else, Kato is very clearly the leader as well as the object of adoration. If anything, K's success, not being recognized by the other members while Kato is put on a pedestal, makes K seem even more isolated and clearly more envious, because, well, he likes Kishimoto and Kishimoto does not like him. And he's very disgruntled at the world at large and the other members of the team, Kishimoto especially, for not thinking he's a cool guy and giving him what he thinks he deserves. So the second mission also ends without him bonding or cooperating with any of the other members. In fact, his isolation grows. The third mission, well, when it's setting up, you'd think it would be different, that it would be better. It's the first time K seems to have formed a connection with anyone, and it's the first time that there aren't any outright bad people in the team. The closest you get to it is a very confused monk, but there are no yakuza, there are no biker gangs, there are no actual criminals or scumbags. But then when we get to the actual mission, K looks even more lonely. Despite getting intimate with another girl, he's clearly not over Kishimoto. He's still envious of Kato and he's still completely self-absorbed. This is the first time K kills an alien in cold blood. During this mission, he usually acts alone. He doesn't try to save an innocent man caught in the crossfire, and generally doesn't listen or cooperate with Kato, who is the leader. He's still very clearly pining for Kishimoto, and on his deathbed he tells the only woman to have ever given a shit about him that the only reason he slept with her is because she let him, and that he doesn't love her, that their connection is one-sided, something he's done since the start of the manga, only willing to accept love but not give it. Now, does he mean that? Probably not, but that's up to interpretation, and that's not the relevant part. These are not the experiences or the actions of someone who's grown to trust people, who is forced to cooperate, and who becomes a leader. That comes after the 4th mission. After the 4th mission, when an alien comes to Kei's classroom, this is after he has lost everyone on the team, he tells him that as retribution for his fallen comrades, he will kill everyone Kei cares about, referring to the people in his classroom. To which Kei says, "Go for it. I don't care about any of these people." Does this sound like a person that learned to trust others and be open to connections? But the thing is, Kei does want human connections. That part of Eyepatch's analysis is completely true. He just doesn't think he's strong enough to handle the consequences of opening himself up to others. Despite a lifetime of learning that being connected to people only puts him in harm's way, he still went down to the tracks to save someone he didn't care about because his childhood friend asked him to. Despite himself, when someone Kei cares about is in danger or needs protection, he will step up to the plate every time. He cannot stand by and let someone he cares about, someone he loves, suffer. It's his weakness, or his strength, depending on how you look at it. And despite himself, despite the connection being completely new and based on pure chance, Kei can't help but try and save one person in his classroom he has formed a connection with. Going on the Gantz missions may not have taught him to trust others, but it did build up his confidence, and the ending of the Temple arc amplified his isolation. These two things allowed him to make one small step. Almost on a whim, he's willing to accept that one person in his classroom is important to him. And when someone is important to him, Kei will always risk his life to try and save that person. Making that one connection, admitting to himself there's one person in this world he cares about. This is the moment the change in Kei starts happening in earnest. His ability to lead, to work with other members in Gantz, these all flowed naturally after this event. After he decided that he is strong enough to handle the consequences of opening himself up to other people. Kei didn't learn to cooperate through Gantz. He didn't become a leader through Gantz. These were all qualities he already had innately, qualities he actively suppressed, cutting himself off from other people and keeping his head down because he knew what happened to people who don't. In other words, Eyepatch Wolf kinda confused cause and effect. And oh man, I lied about keeping this short, Amina. And oh boy.
There's a lot of different ways a creature can feel frightening. They can feel monstrous, they can feel ghostly, they can feel demonic, all of which play off different anxieties of the human condition to elicit different kinds of fear. Fear of violent animals, fear of death and disease, fear of religious ideology, and the fear that the creatures of Gantz specifically elicit is fear of the unknowable and the alien.
Okay, so this one is wrong on 3 counts, and the first one is very granular, so I'm going to speed by it. Gantz does have horror elements, but it's not fear of the unknown. Fear of the unknown is probably best described as Lovecraftian horror, and it's shown best in works like Bloodborne or Darkest Dungeon, as well as obviously the works of Lovecraft. In these works, the thing itself is horrifying and unknowable, and simply trying to gain knowledge about it slowly drives you insane. While there may be a smattering of fear of the unknown, at least when Gantz starts, it very quickly morphs into fear of subjugation. It's not the mere existence of the aliens that drives the horror, but how strong they are and how vicious they are towards humanity. This is a fairly fine distinction, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but to anyone who still doesn't understand the difference, an example of fear of the unknown is the Reapers in Mass Effect 1. They're ancient godlike beings, somewhere in dark space, and simply coming into contact with them will slowly mind-wash you into becoming their servant. An example of fear of subjugation is the Reapers in Mass Effect 3. They're real, they're here, they're invading, they can be fought, but they are much stronger than you. So much so that defeat is more or less a foregone conclusion, and their plans for you are not very nice. However, the much bigger problem with this description is that it misses a giant and perhaps greater part of Gantz's horror: humans. In almost every group Gantz assembles, there are people that are significantly shady. Yakuza, an entire bike gang, a stalker, rapists, sadists, several straight-up psychopaths, and of course, the worst of the worst, the absolute scum of the earth, ping pong players. For most, if not all of the story, and in one arc in particular, humans, and specifically other members of the Gantz team, are just as bad and horrific as the aliens. Many of the Gantz team members are cruel, jealous, vindictive, or straight up insane. Very few of them cooperate, and very few of them are good. The few members that are nice are usually weak, while the strong often use their power to abuse the weaker members of the team. The Gantz team isn't different from the outside world. It follows the exact same principles of the cold, horrible world of Gantz. Cooperation is far from the only survival strategy. Kato is one of very few, if not the only person in this story who is both strong and kind. In Gantz, horror comes from other people, both inside and outside of the death game. Another thing Eyepatch Wolf omitted from his video, other than the human element of its horror, is how well Oku uses choreography to convey horror. So let's quickly talk about the suits. In Gantz, the suits are life. The most important thing to do when you start the game is to put your suit on. Not only does it give you insane strength, it much more importantly protects you. Aliens will easily kill a human not wearing a suit. They can usually kill them in one hit. However, with the suit on, a human can perform insane feats of strength and endure gargantuan amounts of punishment. This is why when a suit breaks, or worse, when someone doesn't have a suit, the feeling of dread ramps up dramatically. Oku does a great job of conveying that pressure, that panic of your life being in danger, not through words, but through the fight itself. Merely seeing a suit leak, showing that it has taken one too many hits and has lost its power, instantly escalates the fight and puts a character in an immediate life-threatening danger, and almost always in a panicked state. Even more terrifying is when you have monsters that know how to disable a suit, or attacks that go through the suit like it was paper. When a monster is able to penetrate the suit without first disabling it, it again escalates the tension of the fight and makes you panic as you realize characters you thought were safe can be gone in an instant. So to sum up the problems with this clip, he mischaracterized the type of horror Gantz utilizes, though I'll admit he was close, and the human elements of the horror, as well as the way it's conveyed through fight choreography, have been omitted. Okay, so let's move on to the next clip.
The early chapters are pretty terrible in how they treat their female characters, especially Kay, who gets a raw deal throughout. And this is something that improves slightly later on when much better female characters are introduced, but it can be pretty rough.
So first, there is no denying that characters are treated terribly in Gantz, including Kishimoto, who undoubtedly gets a raw deal. However, I take issue with the concept that better female characters are introduced later. Kishimoto is not a bad female character. She's tragic and she's weak, but she's also sympathetic and good and kind. She's memorable and gentle and probably an indictment of Japanese society and the insane amount of pressure they put on their children to conform and perform, and how that can end up breaking a person. These aren't better female characters, they're just really badass female characters. Women can be weak and suffer intense tragedy. They can also be incredibly badass and live happily ever after. Neither of these are better or worse. Now sure, people may prefer a type of character over the other, but calling them better really rubbed me the wrong way. Especially when you don't define your terms and you don't explain what you mean when you say better. But anyway, let's keep going with this clip.
There's a pretty horrendous depiction of a gay man.
Right, so this isn't so much a mistake as it is a disagreement, but it's a disagreement I have to voice. This man is not a bad depiction of a gay character. He's the depiction of a gay character who's bad. There are two ways I can think of to define bad depiction. The first is an inaccurate depiction of a real person. So for instance, if I was to make a movie about Michael Jordan and I decided to depict him as an old white woman, that would be a bad depiction of Michael Jordan. The second is a bad depiction of a fictional character. For you to have a bad depiction of a fictional character, you need to betray a previously established trait of that character. A good example of that would be The Last Jedi, where you have a horrible depiction of Luke Skywalker. This is just a bad guy, who also happens to be a rapist and is also gay. He's a bad depiction of a gay man in the same way that one of the straight rapists that appear later in the story are bad depictions of straight men, meaning not at all. They only depict themselves, and because they are internally consistent and clearly fictional, they are good depictions of themselves. They're just rapists who happen to be gay or straight. And by the way, this gay dude is disposed of within about 2 pages of the manga that spans, well, thousands of pages. I have no idea why he decided to even mention him, considering how minor of a part he plays. He literally appears in less than 10 pages during the entire run of the manga. Maybe it's a cultural barrier, I honestly don't know. But restricting what evil characters can be is harmful to creativity and also harmful for overall representation, because it restricts the use of, well, black, gay, Jewish, or any other minority groups to only positive roles. Now, as a personal note, some of my favorite Jewish characters are villains. And to anyone who's wondering why are you talking about Jewish characters, this is an Israeli accent. I am Israeli, also very Jewish. I also love Magneto. He's not the best person in the world, but he's an amazing and complex character that I personally find very engaging. The same can be said about Valkyria Chronicles 3, where some of my favorite characters were Darksons, that world's fictional version of Jews, who worked with the enemy empire. Essentially, these are Jews who collaborated with the Nazis. I find these characters fascinating. Victims who become victimizers. Again, horrible human beings. But that doesn't make them bad characters or bad depictions of, well, anything or anyone. Again, I really wish he defined his terms. This is a repeated problem. He does not explain what he means when he says certain words. But I think I've said enough, so let's just keep going with this clip.
And a absolutely bizarre instance of racial insensitivity.
Okay, so the first time I heard this, I was actually confused. I didn't get what he was talking about when he said racially insensitive, considering that this person isn't black. Then I remembered blackface is a thing, at least in some countries. If you think the act of disguising yourself as a black person or putting on black makeup is racially insensitive, then Eyepatch Wolf is at least partially correct. My problem is that he called it bizarrely racially insensitive, because the act of putting this makeup on is far from bizarre. It actually makes perfect sense within the story. That's right, boys and girls. I am not a coward. Oh, I am a huge coward. Okay, steel your groins. Steal them. That's right, boys and girls. I'm not a coward. I ain't afraid. So buckle up, because I am about to defend blackface. Jesus Christ, why am I defending blackface? Okay, first, in order for me to explain why he needed to disguise himself, I'm going to actually have to use spoilers. I'll put a timecode here to skip to the part where I'm talking about why the use of blackface as a disguise is acceptable, so that you can skip the spoiler-filled part where I explain why he needed to disguise himself in the first place. So, this guy is a former member of the Tokyo Gantz team and one of the psychopaths I talked about. He actually managed to get 100 points and leave Gantz prior to Kei's arrival, but experiencing the death games changed him on a fundamental level. Everything in his everyday life seems bland and boring, and despite being hyper successful in everything he does, he can't help but feel listless, without purpose. He wants to go back and become a member of the Gantz team again, because much like Kei before he changed, that's the one place where he feels alive. Both him and the grade schooler are sorta dark reflections of Kei, and perhaps show where he could have gone if Kei hadn't walked into his life. So, Gantz makes him an offer. Bring as many strong people to the room as you can, and I'll take you back. And remember, the way people get into that room is that they die. Essentially, Gantz is asking him to kill as many people as he can, which he does. So why blackface? To disguise himself. This man is about to kill an extreme amount of people. Some of them will be looking right at him as he does it, and are probably going to hold a bit of a grudge. He then intends on killing himself or getting killed in order to get back to the room. A room that is now filled with strong people he just murdered. Even if we ignore the fact that the people he killed are about to get their hands on high-tech weapons and suits, he's about to be trapped in a room with multiple people he just murdered. If they recognize him, well, that's just a recipe for a bad time. So he needs to make sure they don't recognize him. Not to mention, if anyone does see his face, it will kinda be difficult to resume his normal life after the mission is over. Don't forget, after he's done with Gantz, he intends to go back and live his life as a normal high schooler, which would be really hard if his face was plastered all over the news as a mass shooter. So that's why he decided to put on blackface. Now that I explained why he needed to disguise himself, let's move on to why he used blackface instead of other forms of makeup or disguise. Well, first, it's really good blackface. I mean, look at him, he looks nothing like he usually does, and it makes for a great fucking disguise. This is what real passion for costuming looks like, Justin. But jokes aside, going from Asian to black is a bit of a huge gap. It makes you look very different, reducing the odds of you being detected. Also, unlike a regular mask, it would be very difficult for someone to rip this makeup off, and impossible for it to accidentally fall or shift. This is even more important considering how tall he is. This dude towers over almost everyone else, making him stand out. If he looked anything like himself, his height alone could draw suspicion. So disguising himself as a black person makes even more sense when you insert his abnormal height into the equation. So there are definitely pluses to disguising yourself this way over, say, putting on a mask. Now, is it racially insensitive? I mean, yeah, sure, if you define putting on black makeup as a white, or in this case Asian person, as racially insensitive, then by definition it is racially insensitive. Calling it bizarre, however, is kinda odd because, well, it has a lot of justification in the story and the dude doesn't even have a stand. Also, let me just quickly mention that as someone who doesn't live in a country with a history of slavery or blackface, and for anyone who forgot, I'm Israeli, I was genuinely honestly confused when I first saw this because I forgot blackface was even a thing, and I'm fairly well immersed in Western culture. It's just that for me the knowledge of blackface is trivial knowledge. It's at the very edges of my mind. It doesn't have any emotional weight or any type of significance. As a Japanese person, Oku is probably even more detached from Western sensibilities than I am. So expecting him, a Japanese person writing in a Japanese medium for a Japanese audience during the 90s to cater or even be aware of current day Western sensibilities is a bit self-centered. And don't get me wrong, everyone is a bit self-centered. When I took a trip to Japan, I was kinda shocked the first time I saw the symbol they used for the Buddhist temples. I forgot what it's called, but it's a backwards swastika. Again, Jewish Israeli, I don't like swastikas. But then I got over myself and remembered it was a foreign country with foreign sensibilities, and for them there was nothing wrong with this symbol. It was just a religious symbol. In the same way, for them, there's nothing wrong with blackface. It's just makeup. They don't have the same perception of the world as I do, and I think it would be wrong of me to try and force them to conform to my perception of the world. But this is getting like real weird and real rambly, so let's keep going with the clip.
When does a piece of media cross the line when covering sensitive material, and when is it not okay? And Gantz, to me, definitely crosses that line. It frequently wanders into sensitive territory and uses it for shock value as opposed to building it into its narrative or exploring it in any kind of meaningful way.
So it's kind of difficult for me to respond to this because, well, he didn't really give me anything to talk about. He just made a blanket assertion. I mean, yes, Gantz is absolutely gratuitous at times. As I reread the manga as an adult, the first thing that I noticed that I didn't notice as a kid is how every chapter, or nearly every chapter, has a naked or semi-naked portrait of a busty lady.
Nice!
And hey, I like busty girls as much as the next guy, but every chapter is a bit much. Also, yes, Gantz is absolutely filled with horrific events, and if you cannot handle explicit content, let me join Eyepatch Wolf in saying you should not watch or read Gantz, and I would not recommend it. You're not gonna have a good time. However, I wish Eyepatch Wolf qualified his statements. Yes, I realize this is a running theme here, and said which events he thinks went too far and how he'd have wanted to see them explored, and which events he thinks were done just for shock value. Personally, as I read Gantz for the second time after watching his video, I tried to pinpoint a specific event that I found especially horrifying and that didn't advance the plot or drive character development in some way. I ended up drawing blanks. Whenever something horrible happened, I could draw a line to see how it advanced the story and understand why it was there. If Eyepatch Wolf qualified his statements, then maybe, like the case of bad gay depiction, I'd have completely disagreed with him. Or, like the case of blackface, I'd have been able to completely understand where he was coming from, but offer my own perspective and give some context to the situation. Hell, maybe I would have just agreed with him completely. But as it is, it's hard to make anything out of this statement because he just states his opinion, which is disappointing because I think there could have been a really interesting conversation here. But since he doesn't qualify his opinions, all I can really do is shrug and say I disagree. I will, however, give him full credit and much respect for saying he's not the arbiter of what is and isn't acceptable in art, and being open to other interpretations. However, I wish he would have tried to explain and show examples of how he reached his opinion, because it is an interesting opinion that while I don't share, I'd like to at least be able to understand. Anyway, let's move on to the next clip, which will hopefully be much less controversial, because I'm kinda drenched in sweat over here, in a brave, non-cowardly way.
It was in this moment that the message of Gantz clicked with me. No matter how awful or horrifying the world might seem, it's our connection to other people that let us survive it and make it worth surviving. While Oku does create these instances of cruel, violent nihilism, it's how he contrasts those moments with ones of intense humanity and love that make his stories worth reading. And this to me is the heart of Gantz. People trapped in this world of nightmares, but finding each other through it and together surviving. And that's what I think's kind of beautiful about this series, its ability to capture the bleakest dark and purest light. And to say that even if the world is collapsing around us, all we really need is each other. That really, that's all we ever have.
So that was the last clip. That was his final take on Gantz, and hopefully through what I've already said and already shown you about the series, you can see how counter to the underlying narrative it goes. Gantz's message about human connections, if any, would more accurately be that despite of their danger, human connections are worth the risk. That despite the world being filled with monsters in human form, you should still be brave and choose to connect with other people, even people who have previously harmed you. Despite knowing how much it can end up hurting you, no, despite the fact that it will hurt you, you have to trust that you are strong enough to take it, and that a world without these connections, despite being much safer, is also in some ways much worse. And for anyone who thinks that this isn't a big difference, I am really honestly sorry for wasting your time, but it's a world of difference to me. So obviously Eyepatch's video is better than mine in many ways. His editing is superior, his accent is superior, his face is superior, so are his pecs. However, hopefully I've shown you in what way Eyepatch Wolf misrepresented or misunderstood parts of Gantz and didn't give an accurate depiction of them, as well as given you some additional information that was lacking from his video. If you feel that these differences are too nuanced or unimportant and you actually made it to this point of the video, then I'm honestly sorry for wasting your time, and I hope you still found some form of entertainment and enjoyment out of this video. But to me, these differences are vast. Like I said, I really love Gantz, and as I heard Eyepatch Wolf talk about it, I felt like he was picking and choosing parts of Gantz in order to construct and talk about a different manga. A manga that doesn't exist with a story that wasn't there. And I don't think you need to do that to make people give Gantz a shot. The manga is really genuinely great despite of its flaws, and you don't need to misrepresent it to make people try it. Also, I hope I didn't give the impression that I hated Eyepatch's video. Eyepatch did manage to capture some of the brilliance and absurdity of Gantz. His breakdown of the visual elements was great, and I so agree with him that human connections are a major theme of Gantz, but they're definitely not shown in the bright light he just described. So, if you can't get over gore, please avoid Gantz. If you can't get over plot holes or honestly an ending that tries to explain everything but ends up explaining nothing, avoid Gantz. But if you want an oddly touching, character-driven story that, as I probably demonstrated, will keep you thinking about it for years, filled with tragedy, insane visuals, and just some of the most oddly sweet moments, please give Gantz a shot. Anyway, thanks for watching.